I still remember my first day at Walmart like it was yesterday, not 25 years ago. The Asheville store wasn't as big as the ones you see nowadays, but to 18-year-old me, it felt massive. The manager gave me my blue vest and showed me around, introducing me to everyone, including Zeb Quinn, who worked in the electronics department. Zeb was friendly right from the start, showing me where the break room was and telling jokes about the customers who would come in asking if we had things that were clearly right in front of them. We clicked immediately, both being car guys who dreamed of fixing up old muscle cars someday. He was 2 years older than me and knew so much about cars that I soaked up every bit of information he shared. After a few weeks, we started carpooling to work since we lived in the same neighborhood, and those drives were filled with talk about engines, paint jobs, and which cars we'd buy if we ever won the lottery. Zeb mentioned he was saving up for this specific Mitsubishi that a guy across town was selling, and he'd show me pictures of it on his flip phone. Those first few months working at Walmart were actually some of the happiest times of my life. Simple days, good friendship, and plans for the future. Neither of us knew that in just a few months, everything would change. Looking back now, there were small signs that something wasn't right. Little things I ignored because they didn't seem important at the time. If only I had paid more attention to the details, maybe things would have turned out differently. But when you're young, you don't notice the shadows lurking just out of sight. I first noticed something was off with Zeb around Christmas time, about 2 weeks before he disappeared. He started getting these phone calls that would make him step away from the electronics counter, walking to the back of the store where nobody could hear him. When he'd come back, he'd be different, quieter, distracted, checking his phone every few minutes like he was waiting for something. One day during our lunch break, I caught him staring out the window at the parking lot, not touching his food. And when I asked what was up, he jumped like I'd shocked him. "Just some family stuff," he said, but I'd met his mom before when she came to pick him up once, and they seemed fine. Then there was this guy who started coming into the store, always when Zeb was working. Tall guy with a beard who never bought anything, just walked around electronics pretending to look at TVs while watching Zeb. When I pointed him out, Zeb said it was just someone he knew from high school, but his hands were shaking when he said it. The week before he vanished, Zeb told me he was close to having enough money for that Mitsubishi he wanted, and asked if I'd go with him to check it out after our shift on the 2nd of January. He seemed excited but nervous too, checking his rear-view mirror more than usual when we drove home that week. The last normal conversation we had was about New Year's resolutions. Mine was to start saving for college. His was to fix some mistakes. I didn't think much of it then. On the 1st of January, he called in sick for his shift, which wasn't like him at all. When I called to check on him, he answered after several rings, whispering that he couldn't talk but would see me tomorrow to look at that car. The 2nd of January started like any normal Monday shift. I stocked shelves, helped customers find the coffee makers, and watched the clock until it was time to meet Zeb in the parking lot. He seemed on edge all day, checking his phone constantly and jumping whenever the store phone rang. When our shift ended at 9 p.m., we got in our separate cars. Zeb insisted we drive separately, in case I don't like the car and you need to give me a ride back. I followed his blue Mazda Protege out of the Walmart lot toward where the Mitsubishi seller lived. About 10 minutes into the drive, at a red light, Zeb's car suddenly honked twice. When the light turned green, instead of going straight as planned, he made a quick right turn. I followed, confused, thinking maybe he knew a shortcut. After a few more turns into a neighborhood I didn't recognize, he pulled over and got out of his car, rushing over to my window. "I just got a call that my aunt had a heart attack," he said, looking pale and out of breath. "I need to go to the hospital. Can we reschedule for tomorrow?" Something felt wrong. His eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror of his car, but I nodded and said, "Sure, hope she's okay." He seemed relieved, almost running back to his car. As he pulled away, I noticed another vehicle, a dark pickup truck, that had been parked a few cars behind us suddenly pull out and follow him. I almost followed too, but figured he'd call me later with an update. That was the last time I ever saw Zeb Quinn. I called him that night to check on his aunt, but his phone went straight to voicemail. The next day, he didn't show up for his shift, and no one could reach him. 3 days after Zeb disappeared, his car showed up in the hospital parking lot, though hospital security cameras showed it hadn't been there the night he vanished. The police let me look at it with them since I knew Zeb well. What we found made my skin crawl. The seats were pushed all the way back. Zeb was short and always kept them forward. The headlights had been left on until the battery died, and there was lipstick drawn on the back windshield in the shape of lips. But the thing that still haunts my dreams was the puppy. A live Labrador puppy was in the back seat, whimpering and hungry but otherwise fine, like someone had placed it there as some kind of sick joke or message. There was also a hotel key card and a jacket that didn't belong to Zeb. The police questioned everyone at Walmart, especially me since I was the last confirmed person to see him. I told them everything I could remember about that night, and about the dark pickup truck I'd seen. They seemed particularly interested in Robert Owens, a co-worker from the automotive department, who sometimes hung out with Zeb. Robert had called in sick on the 3rd of January, the day after Zeb vanished, and came back with scratches on his face that he said came from a new kitten. I remembered seeing Robert and Zeb arguing in hushed voices near the dumpsters a week before, but when I'd asked Zeb about it, he brushed it off as nothing important. As the investigation continued, weird things started happening to me too. Hang-up calls in the middle of the night, the feeling of being watched in the parking lot after closing shifts, and once, I came home to find my apartment door slightly open, though nothing was missing. Police searched the woods near where I'd last seen Zeb, and they questioned Robert multiple times, but the case went cold. Years passed, and I never forgot about Zeb. I moved away from Asheville, went to college, started a family, but the mystery of what happened that night always lingered. Then in 2015, I got a call from a detective asking me to come back to Asheville to look at new evidence. When I arrived, they showed me photographs of construction work being done at Robert Owens's old property. Hidden beneath concrete in what had been his basement were human remains. DNA testing would later confirm it was Zeb. The detective shared details they'd pieced together over the years. Robert Owens had apparently been involved with a woman named Misty, who happened to be the girlfriend of Zeb's relative. The theory was that Zeb had discovered Robert and Misty's affair and threatened to expose them. The lipstick on the window matched Misty's shade. The puppy was her attempt at creating confusion in the case, and the jacket in Zeb's car belonged to Robert, who had carelessly left it behind when staging the scene at the hospital. Most chilling was what they found on Zeb's phone records. The call about his aunt's heart attack had come from a gas station payphone, where security footage showed Robert making a call at the exact same time. I remembered more details too, how Robert had started driving a new truck shortly after Zeb disappeared, how he'd suddenly paid off debts he'd been complaining about for months, and how he'd specifically requested to take over Zeb's shifts in electronics where the more expensive, easily pocketable merchandise was kept. The detective explained that they believed Robert had lured Zeb away from me that night, killed him over both the affair and some theft scheme they'd been running, then tried to make it look like Zeb had simply run away. In 2017, Robert Owens was formally charged with Zeb's murder. During the trial, I had to testify about that last night, reliving every detail I could remember. The hardest part was hearing the medical examiner explain that Zeb had died from blunt force trauma to the head, likely within hours of when I'd last seen him alive. I couldn't stop thinking that if I had just followed that truck instead of going home, maybe my friend would still be alive. Misty testified too, admitting her role in covering up the crime but insisting she hadn't known Robert was going to kill him. She was the one who'd placed the puppy in the car, thinking it would confuse investigators or make them think Zeb had planned to disappear. Robert was sentenced to 30 years, but no prison time will ever bring Zeb back or erase what happened. Sometimes I still dream about that night. In my dreams, I make a different choice and follow that truck, or I convince Zeb to let me come with him to see the Mitsubishi, or I notice the danger signs earlier and warn him. I quit Walmart after the trial. Couldn't stand to walk past the electronics department where Zeb's photo still hung on the employee memorial wall. Last year, I finally visited his grave, left some car magazines he would have liked. As I was leaving the cemetery, I noticed a blue Mazda similar to Zeb's parked near the entrance with its headlights on, though it was the middle of the day. When I got closer, it drove away, but not before I caught a glimpse of the driver. Just for a second, I could have sworn it was Zeb, looking exactly as he did at 18. The rational part of my brain says it was just my mind playing tricks, but a smaller part wonders if some memories are so powerful they leave echoes in this world, like Zeb still out there, driving to look at that car he never got to see. I was 9 the first time my mom took me to Walmart late at night. She said there was something special about shopping when the world was quiet, when the aisles stretched out like empty highways and the fluorescent lights hummed like tired street lamps. I remember holding her hand as we wandered through the toy section, my fingers tracing the plastic packaging of dolls and action figures I knew we couldn't afford, but I didn't mind. It wasn't about what we bought, it was about the feeling of being there, just the two of us, wrapped in the stillness of a place that always smelled like floor cleaner and warm bread. Even now, I can still hear the gentle squeak of our shopping cart wheels, the distant murmur of an employee restocking shelves. That Walmart, the one on the east side of town, felt safe to me. It felt like home. And that's why, years later, when I found myself standing in the same store on the 3rd of August, 2019, staring at the front doors as screams filled the air, I couldn't move. Because the thing about feeling safe is that you never realize how quickly it can be taken away. At first, it was just a sound, distant, muffled, like someone dropping a box in the back of the store. I didn't think much of it. Then, another noise. A sharp crack, followed by a scream that cut through the air like a blade. My body stiffened, a cold wave washing over me as I turned toward the entrance. People were running. A woman tripped over a display of cereal boxes, her hands flailing as she hit the ground. And then I saw him. He wasn't running. He was walking slow, steady, like he had all the time in the world. A man with a rifle, his face blank, his eyes scanning the aisles like he was choosing groceries. I couldn't breathe. My hands shook as I ducked behind a rack of clearance clothes, the cheap fabric swallowing me whole. My heart pounded against my ribs, a drumbeat of terror. I wanted to believe it was a robbery, that he wanted money, that if I just stayed still he would leave. But the way he moved, calm, deliberate, was like he wasn't looking for money. He was looking for people. I heard the shots before I saw the bodies. The first one sounded like firecrackers, a sharp pop that sent a shock through my bones. The second made my stomach turn. A man near the registers collapsed, his hands gripping his chest as red spread across his shirt like spilled ink. A woman screamed for her child, her voice breaking as she crawled toward a small, crumpled figure on the floor. I pressed my hands over my ears, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The smell of copper filled the air, thick and metallic, clinging to my skin like oil. My legs refused to move, my body frozen in the space between fight and flight. And then, the worst thing happened. The shooter stopped walking. He tilted his head, listening, and then, like he could feel my presence, turned, right, toward me. I swear he saw me. I swear in that moment our eyes met, but he didn't raise his gun. He just stood there, staring, as if he was waiting for something. The silence between us stretched, unbearable, and then footsteps. A security guard, shaking, his gun raised. The shooter turned, almost lazy, like he was bored now. And then, just like that, he walked away, toward the next aisle, toward more people. I took my chance, scrambling on my hands and knees, crawling past spilled groceries and shattered glass, past bodies that I forced myself not to look at. I could hear the security guard shouting, the echo of another shot, and then the sound of sirens far away but getting closer. I reached the back of the store, my fingers digging into the cool tile as I pushed through an emergency exit. The second I hit the pavement, my body gave out. I couldn't cry. I couldn't scream. I could only sit there, gasping, as the world inside that Walmart turned red. They say trauma does strange things to the mind, that the brain tries to protect itself, warping memories, blurring details, but I remember everything. I remember the way the air smelled like gunpowder and sugar from broken bags of cereal. I remember the way my mom's voice used to echo in those aisles, reminding me to stay close. I remember the way the shooter looked at me like I was nothing, like I was just another thing in the store. For years, I thought I survived because I hid well enough, because luck was on my side. But now, I wonder if it was something else, if he let me live. If he knew I would carry the weight of that night forever, that no matter how many years passed, no matter how many times I told myself I was safe, I would always feel that stare. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what he wanted. I still remember my first day working at Walmart like it was yesterday. The excitement of my first real job at 19, the feeling of finally becoming independent. The bakery team welcomed me with open arms, showing me around the gleaming equipment, teaching me how to use the mixers, the display cases, and yes, even the massive industrial ovens that could fit several racks of bread at once. I loved the smell of fresh pastries in the morning, the warmth of the kitchen area, and how customers would smile when I handed them birthday cakes. My supervisor, Jen, was patient, teaching me all the safety protocols. Always check equipment twice, never work alone after hours, and most importantly, follow the lockout procedures for the ovens during cleaning. I made friends quickly, especially with Aiden from electronics who'd stop by during breaks for day-old donuts, and Maria who worked in produce across the way. Everything felt so normal, so safe, so wonderfully ordinary. Little did I know that in just 3 months, something would happen that would change everything. The bakery department had always seemed like the happiest place in the store, but beneath that warm exterior, something cold was waiting. The first strange thing I noticed was about 6 weeks in, when the night maintenance crew complained about the bakery ovens turning on by themselves. The store manager brushed it off as a circuit problem, but the maintenance guy, Mr. Peterson, an older man who'd worked there for decades, seemed genuinely disturbed. "Those ovens have a mind of their own," he'd mutter, refusing to clean the bakery section alone after dark. I laughed it off then, thinking he was just being superstitious, but I started noticing odd things. My self-timer settings changed between shifts. The temperature dial moved higher than where we'd left it. Occasional burning smells with no source. One morning I arrived to find all the display trays had been rearranged overnight, though the closing team swore they'd left everything normal. Around the same time, the lights in the bakery started flickering, but only when I worked alone. The worst was when the heavy oven door slammed shut suddenly while I was reaching inside to clean it, missing my arm by inches. The store's night manager frowned when I reported it. That's the thing about big stores, they hold on to memories, especially the bad ones. It was Maria who first told me about Ashley, the previous bakery employee who had quit suddenly 3 months before I started. She just stopped showing up one day. Maria whispered during lunch break, said something was wrong with the bakery, that something was watching her. Other co-workers had different stories. Some said Ashley had mental health issues. Others claimed she'd reported equipment malfunctions that management ignored. The most disturbing account came from Aiden, who worked the overnight restocking shift occasionally. Ashley told me she heard voices coming from the big oven, like whispers calling her name after midnight. I tried researching Ashley online but found nothing except a brief mention in the store newsletter about her moving on to new opportunities. That night, I couldn't sleep, thinking about all the times I'd felt watched in the bakery, especially near the walk-in oven. The next day, I asked Jen directly about Ashley, and her face went pale. "We don't talk about that," she said sharply, then softened her tone. "Just never work bakery cleanup alone, okay? Always have someone nearby, especially after closing." I started taking extra shifts that month because I needed money for college, which meant working late more often. That's when things really intensified. The oven timers began going off randomly, blaring through the empty department at odd hours. One night around 10 p.m., while cleaning the display cases, I distinctly heard someone whisper my name from inside the walk-in oven, though the door was sealed tight. I convinced myself it was just the sound of air moving through the ventilation system. Then came the nightmare's vivid dreams about being trapped inside the oven, pounding on the insulated door while the temperature climbed higher and higher. I started noticing burn marks appearing on my arms after shifts, small ones I couldn't explain. The breaking point came when I found an old employee badge wedged behind the oven control panel during deep cleaning. It belonged to someone named Rebecca, not Ashley, with a photo of a young woman I'd never seen before, dated 15 years earlier. When I showed my supervisor, she snatched it away, looking terrified. "Where did you find this?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "She doesn't exist. There was never a Rebecca here." That night, I couldn't sleep, so I searched online for Rebecca and Walmart Halifax and found an archived news article from 2009 that made my blood run cold. Rebecca Chen, 20, had died in a tragic accident at the store when she somehow became trapped in the bakery's industrial oven during an overnight cleaning shift. The article mentioned that the safety features had apparently malfunctioned, allowing the oven to activate while she was inside. The store had settled with the family and upgraded all equipment afterward. With shaking hands, I called the oldest employee I knew, Carol from HR, who had been at the store for over 20 years. There was a long silence before she admitted she'd been working there when it happened. "That's why I was worried when you took the bakery job," she confessed. "There have been stories ever since equipment moving, strange sounds, 3 bakery employees quitting in the past year alone." She begged me to request a department transfer immediately. I agreed, but had one closing shift left that week. As I hung up, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Don't go back. She's still there. She's waiting for someone to take her place." I should have listened, should have called in sick, but I needed the job, and convinced myself it was all coincidence and imagination. That final night, a massive thunderstorm knocked out power to half the store, including the security cameras. My supervisor called to say she was running late, telling me to start the closing cleaning procedure but wait for her before handling the ovens. As I wiped down counters in the darkened bakery, illuminated only by emergency lights, the walk-in oven door slowly creaked open on its own. Standing there, I felt an overwhelming urge to look inside, to check if something was wrong with the mechanisms. The moment I stepped partially in, flashlight in hand, I heard a girl's voice clearly say, "Finally," as a violent force shoved me forward. I tumbled inside, dropping my phone as the heavy door swung shut with a definitive click. Panic surged through me as I pounded on the metal, screaming for help, but I knew the soundproof door would muffle everything. Then came the worst sound, the mechanical click of the timer engaging, followed by the whoosh of gas burners igniting. Through my tears, I saw something impossible: handprints scorched into the metal walls, dozens of them, and scratched into the back wall, barely visible. 2 names, Rebecca, and now, a freshly carved Ashley.